Before we get into the debate, I wanted to give a little bit of background on what led up to this. So, a few weeks ago, you may have tuned into a discussion that I had with someone named Cody, who is a previous student of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, who also participated in the Fusion program that is supposedly dedicated to making biblical adults who make disciples. Now, Cody disagreed with this and has various reasons based on his experience and things he knows to be true, and the inconsistency of the seminary and the Fusion program's mission that they say they're for, and their actions and the organizations they support and the things that they participate in. And so that was my discussion with Cody. And then somebody, after we posted the episode, reached out named Theo, who is also a previous student of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and a friend of Cody, and he was also in the Fusion program. He came on to defend the Fusion program and tell us why we were wrong about pretty much everything we said. But the thing that surprised me was that Theo actually agreed with the corruption that was happening in the seminary. And so, as I'm sure this is going to be spread around Midwestern like our previous episode was, I want everybody who listens to this to know that this corruption is coming to light, and a lot of students are aware of it. And I think a lot of students and professors are unfortunately still supporting the seminary, but these things are becoming more and more blatantly obvious, even to the point where students who love a certain program that they're a part of still are very aware of the kind of corruption and the bad professors and the bad president that's at the seminary and their unbiblical views on very serious topics. And even if you're not associated with Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in any way, you're not local to Kansas City, that's okay. I think this podcast can still be very interesting for you because Midwestern is lauded around here anyway as one of the most conservative Southern Baptist seminaries. It is the largest Protestant denomination in the world. And so for all Protestants, I think this is important to see the kinds of things that are slithering into our quote-unquote Christian educational institutions. Enjoy the debate. You're listening to the Spare No Arrows podcast, a show that equips Christians to stand against our anti-Christian culture. My name's Cody Lawrence, and I'm here to discuss culture, politics, theology, and building Christendom for the glory of God with courage, biblical truth, and sound doctrine. Well, so we made a podcast that's kind of, I guess, evidently circulating around Midwestern Seminary. You were the only person to give kind of public pushback. I appreciated that, and that's admirable, I think, because it seems to me that there is a culture of non-combativeness in evangelicalism that I'm sure we can all agree on. And so it was, I like it. Like, I wasn't angry when you left your comments. I was like, oh, this could be a fun conversation because you were the only person who directly was like, hey, you're wrong about things, and also let's talk about it. Because if in fact we are wrong, or if in fact some of the things we said was sinful, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to confront us and tell us that we're sinning so that we have a chance to repent. So we'll see if we're sinning, or we'll see if we can agree on some issues or not. So what, I don't know, do you want to give kind of a summation of our conversation?
Yeah, I can do that. So did the podcast, mainly two aspects. We talked a lot about the Fusion program at Midwestern, which is like a missions training program that I did that Theo has also done.
And Theo, you're currently in Fusion, or you finished?
Just 1 year removed, yeah.
Okay.
Last year.
And are you an advocate?
I'm not.
Okay.
No.
Are you going to be an advocate?
I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you finished it and you had a good experience.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, great experience too.
Yeah, so I did it, I guess it's been like 6-7 years now. It's been a while since I did Fusion. I think 2018, 2019 was the years that I did it. So I talked about some of the issues that I perceive in Fusion, some of the things that I've seen people do come out of Fusion that I think are unbiblical, that don't really fit well within what I see as a sound Christian worldview that produces Fusion would say the end goal is like long-term success, biblical adulthood. So I had a lot of pushback. I don't think the setup really is what would qualify for biblical adulthood at the end of Fusion. A lot of the things that it produces, I think, are actually the opposite of biblical adulthood. And then the rest of the podcast, we kind of talked about abortion and other issues that I see at Midwestern that I think are sinful and wrong. I think we might agree on those issues, maybe more than the Fusion stuff.
Based on what Cody said and kind of the overall content of our opinions, because I agree with the majority of the opinions that you shared. So, like, what is your overall contention with some of the stuff we said?
Yeah, and so just some like background for me. Like I did Fusion last year, but I'm not currently going to Spurgeon or Midwestern, and so I don't have any plan to go back. I really did Fusion just for the sake of Fusion. Like I don't have any desire to get a degree or like any like biblical studies.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Why? So you just went to Midwestern for Fusion?
Yeah, specifically for Fusion.
Interesting.
And so yeah, I know Cody ended the conversation on the last podcast by saying like he doesn't recommend anybody do Fusion.
Yeah.
I'd probably be one of Cody's friends who would be the opposite camp that says I think a lot of people should do Fusion.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, I think the contention I had was just like a lot of statements that were said. I think were either like didn't give a fair representation of Fusion as a whole, or just like weren't true entirely. There's like some things that like have been true, and like that's not where Fusion's at now, which I think. I think Cody recognizes in the podcast a lot. Like it's been several years since you did it, and there's things that could have changed. But I think there's also things that like have been the same throughout Fusion over the years. They were just like wrongly represented. And so I think, like Cody said, when it comes down to things about Midwestern and abortion and their stance on that, like when we talked last time, like I definitely like, agree with Cody's stance on that.
Interesting. So let's talk about that. What did you perceive while you were there, or just from stuff that you've heard, is the official like Midwestern stance on abortion?
I wouldn't say like it was ever brought up to my attention of like this is how we feel about abortion. This is our stance on it. And so I honestly didn't know like anything about it until Cody brought it up in the podcast. I wouldn't say like I'm a huge fan of President Allen to begin with. Just like
why?
I think he just like. The book, a lot of books he's wrote, I don't think are like super solid. He like has one book. It's like basically How to Be a Christian 101. Definitely don't think it's a great book. They give it away to like a lot of people. But I'm just like, I think it's like one of his first books he wrote, and it's like popular because he's like president of the seminary, and so like they try to push it a lot. But it's like it's really like I think there's things that just like aren't helpful for. I've only read like excerpts from it, and so but I don't think it's like helpful for like. Every Christian needs to read this, and this is how you be a good Christian. And so, I don't think a lot of his beliefs are as reformed as I would hope he would be. I think he does probably lean towards more liberal side of like conservatism. Conservatism.
Yeah. Conservatism.
Yeah.
It seems that way.
And so, I mean, even going there, like I've had critiques of him. I've talked to people about that, like even at the seminary, like. I definitely don't agree with everything. And even like other professors there, I definitely don't agree with some of their stances on things.
Interesting. You think the president of the seminary would be like a good representative of the seminary itself? What are some of the criticisms you've heard from other students that you've encountered?
I mean, I think, again, like a lot of it has been like, he's very, I would say more liberal than like what you might consider like some of the other SBC seminary presidents, like Al Mohler. People would say like he stands harder on different issues than like President Allen would. Like abortion, for example, like Mohler has a very hard stance on abortion. Like abortion is wrong, and like we should fight to stop it. And again, like I haven't heard President Allen say anything specifically about abortion. And so like I don't know, like I can't speak for him, but like if like he, I think like he said like at the convention, like he's always dodged questions about it.
Yeah, why don't you elaborate on what happened with that again?
Yeah, so I've been to 2 SBC conventions, and so there's there's the abolitionist guys in the SBC. I mean, there's like the mainline guys like Devers and others, but there's always people bringing this to attention pretty much anytime they get an opportunity, because what's being taught in the SBC abroad is, if it's not heresy, it's at least heterodox. You know, it's not the main
it's
line.
a serious
Like,
departure from but what is the position?
So women are victims of abortion, always. Women should never be criminalized for abortion, which means that abortion should never be done away with. It should always be illegal for. So the basic conclusion that it comes to is that abortion should always be legal for women because they're victims of abortion. So maybe we ban the abortion procedures in the pill, but if she does it with a coat hanger at home, that's okay.
She's not a victim.
We
need to help her and like care for her.
Yeah, I mean, a couple years ago, maybe it's this last convention or the one before, a couple years before, was let's make abortion unthinkable. That was kind of the mainline push. So
which sounds good. Like that. It's like we want to make abortion unthinkable, but what they were pushing was like, it seemed like the "let's make abortion unthinkable" line was more like, let's do that instead of illegalize it. Yeah, like we want to make it unthinkable.
Oh, completely
and illegalize it.
Completely opposed to making it illegal for the woman.
And that's serious.
Yeah,
so I'm glad we agree on that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's huge. Like, that's one of the 10 Commandments. I think if somebody doesn't understand what murder is, like that's a fundamental, like Christian, like obvious Christian truth. Not only are they not qualified for pastoral ministry, but I'd say they're also not qualified to teach people to participate in pastoral ministry. And these people are professors and presidents of seminaries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I don't have any pushback there for you, for sure.
Yeah. And so one of the other issues that you brought up was the egalitarianism at Midwestern and in Fusion, but specific, just the whole thing and the whole SBC. But tell us, like broadly, in like the SBC or at Midwestern specifically, like the things that you've seen that are egalitarianism slithering in.
In the SBC, it's pretty black and white, I'd say. There's thousands of churches that have female pastors. I mean, it's undeniable. In the SBC, at the last convention, it was not voted to actually start taking steps to remove those churches. So it was voted against. It needed a 2/3 majority vote. Didn't get it. I think it got it got the majority. It got like 55%, 60%, something like that. So in the SBC, it's rampant. It happens a lot. And I mean, a lot of the problem, I think, stems from the SBC itself. Midwestern is an SBC seminary. So the SBC is a root, and it has all of these different things that it functions. It's the biggest Christian denomination in America. So it has all these things from the root that are bad and that are wrong, and it's going to seep into everything because, the root is what's growing the tree. It's what's producing. It's sucking in the nutrients. It's building the tree up, and the tree is producing a lot of bad fruit. So what's stemming from the SBC, because Midwestern is like a peer organization within the SBC, so it's not in cooperation with a single church. It's in cooperation with a multitude of churches. And I mean, you can look across the spectrum, the IMB, the NAMB, all these things. You can see egalitarianism slipping in, women being pastors of churches, and if they're not, they're maybe fulfilling a pastoral duty without the title of pastor. That happens a lot as well.
And then you told me what the SBC said was like the SBC has started, it maybe inconsistently kicking out some churches, disfellowshipping some churches with female lead pastors. But they totally excuse churches with women in non-lead pastor roles, but they still call themselves pastors.
Yeah,
which is completely.
Maybe they say, "Oh, well, I've heard it said, well, maybe they just don't know what a pastor is." It's like, well, that's even worse. Like, you have churches that don't know what pastors are. Like, You just shot
That's
yourself in the
pretty
foot
important.
with that.
That's another one of those
that's pretty
like
bad.
fundamental Christian truths. If you have a church, you need a pastor, and if you have no idea what a pastor even is, then like
Yeah.
maybe you shouldn't have a church.
I mean, and this isn't just like some randos. This is like J.D. Greer and company. Like, this is people who are big into SBC. It's not just like, oh, Jim Bob said that they don't know what pastors are. It's big people in the SBC. And the end that we talk about is unity and mission. That's talked about a lot in the SBC. Keep the main thing, fulfill the Great Commission. But you can't do that if you don't even know what a pastor is. You can't. We can't ignore Scripture for the end of the Great Commission going forth, because what we're actually going to see is the opposite of that happening. The Great Commission is, and it's in teaching them to obey that all that I have commanded. And if that's not happening, and I mean, one of the most basic things in church planning is raising up elders. Like, that's one of the chief roles. That's the end of planting a church.
And it seems
is
like
raising up an elder.
That's like the very first thing that Paul did.
Yeah.
When he went to churches, he would train up men.
Yeah.
And he would set them over the church, and he would leave.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that Paul necessarily was like training up 150 people. He was training up like maybe two or three people,
depending on
and
the
then leave.
situation. Yeah.
Interesting. So you're kind of saying that because the SBC has this horrible corruption of egalitarianism, and also definitely Midwestern Seminary has this same corruption of egalitarianism, and therefore, because the fusion program and because Midwestern is this like fruit on the tree of the SBC, that it also has to share in this corruption, even if maybe it's not blatantly obvious that fusion participates in these things. But you're saying that fusion, like, they're different. They outright disagree with this stuff, and maybe they have participated in helping these churches, but it was in extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
But they openly disagree with egalitarianism.
Yeah, I mean, I think one good example is like even last year, like there was a fusion girls team that was supposed to go to a part of South Asia, and they were told like your whole summer like overseas will be spent like training church leaders, and they found that out like later throughout the semester. And when Fusion heard that, they're like, we can't let this happen, like because like our desire is that we would walk with like biblical mission mindset overseas. It's like if pastors are being trained by women, it's like that's not biblical. But and so like if you just have all these pastors that are getting unbiblical training, like are they really pastors? Like no, probably not. Right. And so that team ended up like changing their whole plan for their summer overseas, and they didn't end up going to do that. And so I don't know what that says to the missionaries. They're like, this is what we want your team to do. I don't know if they knew like it was only girls that were coming. But even that is like, yeah, I think Fusion does separate themselves from that, because it's like they were faced with that and they chose like, no, we're not going to send these people to do like church trainings for pastors.
Yeah.
I would say they haven't in the past.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
if that's happening now, praise God. Maybe they're making a right shift towards things. But what me and Theo talked about last time is, well, if it's happened, that's public knowledge now.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be repented of.
Yeah.
Have they ever come out with any kind of public statement as far as you know, like, hey, everybody, hey, seminary, and because the seminary has this egalitarianism in it, and we can talk about examples of that. Like I have plenty that I've heard of, like, you know, women in Midwestern are being trained to be pastors, even though that's not an official position in Midwestern. They're doing it, and they know they're doing it. I'd say because they're more for the cash than they are for the church, unfortunately, in a lot of situations. I would say I would go probably farther than Cody would say. And because egalitarianism and abortion, and there are all these fundamental issues that Midwestern, I think, gets wrong. I would say until they correct those things, Midwestern shouldn't even exist. Like, do not go to Midwestern while they are so bad on these issues. And that would include fusion. Like, I really don't care about fusion. But it's hard to see how these are not connected, because fusion, maybe if they stand up again, I guess this is what I'm trying to say. If fusion disagrees with these issues openly, even if they haven't repented of it, why aren't they resisting the egalitarianism at Midwestern? Because they're at Midwestern. Yeah,
I mean, I think in a lot of ways Fusion is very separate from the rest of the school. the way they do things is like very different. Like one thing that sets like Fusion apart from everybody that like is like a visual thing that they see is like Fusion students all wear like a Fusion uniform. It's like a blue polo with gray slacks. It's like, all right, everybody knows like those are Fusion people. It's like it's like that's what it's been for ever since Fusion started. And so it's not like something like they're trying to push away from the school, but I think it's just like they've always been like that. But yeah, I mean, I think like the stance of people who come into Fusion is very different than people who are just like at the college. Like last year, like there was a handful, maybe like a group of 10 guys who were in Fusion, who every Saturday would go to the abortion clinic and would stand outside and would preach the gospel. As opposed to like the stance of a seminary that's like saying, oh, like abortion isn't necessarily wrong on all categories. And so yeah, you have like this one group of people who's saying abortion isn't wrong, or we're not going to like penalize it. And then you have other people who are saying abortion is wrong, it is murder, and we're preaching the gospel to people. And to say Fusion made those people who they are, I don't think so. Like I think the people who came into Fusion already had those convictions, and yet like because of the direction that Fusion pushes people, as opposed to just like the seminary or the college life, Fusion like asks a lot more commitment from people. In a lot of spiritual ways, I would say. Fusion demands that, yeah, you would confess sin, that you would walk in holiness, whereas like an undergraduate who's going to Spurgeon College is kind of like living college life, and they're just like doing what they want. And so Fusion does push for like a desire to see like people who are daily dying to themselves for the sake of glorifying God. And as much as like a college as a whole can say like we desire to see biblical men and women come through our seminary and programs, who's like actually pushing for that? It's like it's probably not the professors, like it's probably not their RAs, like they're probably not pushing that. But from Fusion, it is happening. Like a day in and day out, people are being pushed, like put to death sin and walk in holiness. And so I think yeah, there is a very big contrast between Fusion itself and the rest of the college.
That's really funny to me how like critical you are of Midwestern. Like, I mean, I'm surprised that we're agreeing on these things. So it's possible that Fusion is just this salt and light in this dark, horrid place called Midwestern. Do you see how it's hard for us to kind of separate the two?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, it could be. That's difficult.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of ways that Midwestern as a whole is like continuing to shift in a direction that I would be like, this is like not good. I was just like, yeah, whether it's like liberalism, one thing like I know a lot of people who disagree with me on this, but like they've added several sports teams in the past few years, and it's like, what's the direction here? It's like, are you trying to train people to be people like pastors, like leaders in churches, like whatever it would be, for like the sake of like the gospel going forward? Are we just like trying to become another college that's like has a Christian name to it, but like we don't actually live for that like goal of like glorifying Christ? And so yeah, I would say I definitely disagree with a lot of the direction Midwestern goes as a whole, but when it comes to Fusion, yeah, I think I'm like 110% on board with everything Fusion does. So
Everything.
yeah, I mean, I haven't found something I would disagree with yet. So.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so I kind of, I don't want to be pedantic, but I think based on like what I understood from Cody and then some of the disagreements that you had with Cody in the comments, I kind of want to parse those out.
Yeah.
So one for example is just the dating thing. So one thing that seems really sketchy to me, like maybe this like just weirds me out when you said dating, like you're not allowed to date when you're in Fusion. And you replied in the comments and you said, as far as dating and being in a relationship goes, Fusion does have specific guidelines that they have in place, but dating itself is not banned or outlawed.
Yeah.
But, so you said, Fusion puts restriction on a dating relationship through your time in Fusion for the sake of focusing on your growth for a short time, which sounds like they ban dating while you're in Fusion. So
if you were in a previous relationship, you don't have to break up with your...
Okay. But...
You can't begin a relationship.
And is that true? You can't begin so they do ban dating. They don't say you have to stop dating, but they do ban some amount of dating.
Sure, you can say that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, yeah, you could say they ban dating, but
You would just think that that's okay.
I wouldn't say it's okay to just like say, oh, ban dating, but I don't think that's what they're doing as a whole, because it's like I know like several people over the last years who came into Fusion in a relationship and they've like had that dating relationship, even like engagement through their Fusion year, and like Fusion has like pushed back on that.
Okay.
What I think.
Does that technically go against their policy, or
No.
is it only like you can't start a dating
Yeah.
relationship?
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, that seems like the same thing, because as Christians, we are called to be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, for sure.
And so what? Okay, let me ask this: what is the purpose of restricting dating?
Yeah.
In Fusion, because it is restricted. Like we agree on that.
Yeah.
Maybe not for people who are already in relationships. Sure. So why? What reason do they have for restricting dating?
Yeah.
When you enter into Fusion.
Yeah. One of the biggest reasons is like the people, like Fusion as itself, like spends a lot of time together, and often guys and girls in Fusion start to like each other, or they think they like each other.
Very normal.
Yeah.
College freshmen.
It probably happens anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
College freshmen for the most part, so it's like half of them are homeschooled, and this is the first time a guy's seen a girl for 3 years or whatever.
Midwestern also bans people drinking alcohol, but tons of people do that anyway, too.
Sure.
So, like,
Yeah.
I don't know how serious these policies are, which probably tells me, like, maybe these policies just shouldn't exist if they're not actually enforced. Are they enforced, the dating thing in Fusion?
Yeah. That
They
is
like yell at you if you date somebody?
I wouldn't say they would like just like publicly like yell at you,
Will
but
they kick you out if you continue a relationship that you start?
yeah, we come to that point. And I think so. The reason why is like Fusion is committed to like giving you like a year of life where you're like committing to like nothing. Like eventually we get to like you're not committing to a job either. And it's like no job, no dating. Like what are you committing to? It's like you're committing to your own personal growth and growing alongside other people. And so like Fusion has like a cohort or like a group of people that you live with. Like you do everything in life with them. You go to the same classes, you go to the same church, etc. And the opportunity that you get to grow alongside them without having distractions of a job or a relationship that you're pursuing. Not that those things are bad at all, but that you're like not committing to those things for 1 year is what Fusion is pushing you to do.
And what's the end? So like, why would Fusion? So like, what is the benefit of living with this group of people and not committing to a job or a relationship for a year?
Yeah. So like benefits that come with like living with people is like day in and day out confessing sin to one another, which is like for my own personal life, like I grew a lot in how I confess sin. I didn't have a regular confession of sin before going to Fusion, and now since being out of Fusion, like I do have like that rhythm. So like I want to confess sin to brothers in Christ because I know it's helpful for myself and it's like helpful for them to encourage me. And so yeah, you grow in confession of sin. You grow alongside each other, just like reading the Word together, pushing each other towards holiness. And so those are like two like big things that like are benefits.
So the end is then biblical adulthood. I mean, that's what the end is what they would say biblical adulthood. So my contention would be, one, what biblical precedents do you have to do this? So whenever I see all these things, confession of sin, living life together, it sounds like Fusion's trying to replace the local church. These cohorts are almost functionally churches. And maybe you still go to church, and maybe some people are more committed to the church than other people. But like all of these things, in my mind, would take place better if they just had mature men in local churches who are ready to disciple guys. Why is it better for a guy who's maybe a year older than you to be like your main discipler whenever they have all these connections with all of these churches, with all of these mature men who are actually mature men who are willing to spend time with younger people. And like the dating thing is like, what do people normally do with their lives? They get married, they have a wife, they have kids, they work a job.
And you should do those things.
Yeah.
Those things are good, those things are right. And it's like, it doesn't feel right to me to tell someone, because so whenever I finished Fusion, it was recommended not to pursue a relationship for a year after Fusion.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, people
No.
heed that.
I wasn't told that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And things maybe have shifted. There's been changes in leadership. Everything's not the same.
But they still ban dating during Fusion.
Yeah.
At least.
So I think it just, and the people that I've seen come out of Fusion, I know so many people who are intentionally not having kids for the sake of either we want to do missions or I want to finish my degree at Midwestern, or I mean, you can just fill in the blank with whatever.
So I don't think it's fair to say like Fusion pushes that on people though. I don't think Fusion, despite like saying yeah you can't date for a year, like I think Fusion encourages that people would get married and have kids and would go to the nations. Like you see that, like I mean, there's a lot of people who've come out of Fusion who've ended up like getting married and going overseas.
Well, I would say that's just a normal thing. That's just normal life.
But I don't think you can say like Fusion pushes a precedent that then like following out of Fusion, like
what part of Fusion promotes dating, marriage?
I think for people who like come into Fusion in like those kind of relationships, they're like strongly encouraged to like seek out like counseling from like married people. Like for example, like there was a couple last year who came in dating, got engaged during the Fusion year, and through that whole year, people that were discipling them was like a married couple at their church.
I guess maybe I'll rephrase. I know this didn't happen to me. Were you encouraged during Fusion? Hey, real biblical manhood is find a wife
and have kids.
I would say our cohort talked a lot about like
Fusion leadership.
I wouldn't say like Fusion leadership ever like came out and said like do these things.
One kind of observation that I have before we go on is that so I'm sure you've noticed this too, but sometimes in especially SBC organizations, in big evangelical organizations, big EVA, people have more loyalty to the organizations themselves than they do the truth. And I've found myself in positions like that where I just want to defend, like, oh, this thing I like has a bad thing about it, and I got to defend it because the thing I like is good. And I just want to warn you to make sure you're not doing that. It's okay. Like, Fusion can be good. Fusion can do good things. You could have legitimately had a really good experience in Fusion, and Fusion can still have problems.
Sure.
Like, it raised my eyebrows when you were like, I agree with everything Fusion does. Like, you can't. Like, because nothing in the world is perfect. And maybe you were exaggerating when you said that. Yeah. I hope you were. But, like, it's okay. And maybe just think about this. It's okay to disagree with, like, yeah, maybe Fusion should lay off the no dating thing. Another observation that I had about the dating thing is... I want to include...
Whenever I said this statement, did Fusion tell you that you should find a wife and find... I'm not saying in that, every week Fusion should be teaching.
Yeah.
You have to... But,
sure, of course.
I mean, that's... If we're talking about biblical manhood and womanhood, that's like the main thing in the average person's life.
Sure.
Is finding a wife. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. The man who fears the Lord will have children like olive shoots around his table, and he will behold his children's children. Like, this is a common theme through Scripture. Yeah. A wife, kids, and like the product of that is a lot of the biblical man's and woman's Christian life.
And would it be accurate to say, like, in a phrase, the purpose of Fusion is to make people better Christians?
I wouldn't say no. I'm gonna say that's like the goal of Fusion.
So what's like in a 2 words?
The I'll give you like the ethos statement of Fusion is like they exist to release biblical adults committed to making disciples for God's glory.
Okay, biblical adults to make disciples for the glory of God.
Yeah.
It seems to me that one of the best. Well, I don't want to belabor the point. It seems to me one of the best possible ways to make disciples is to have kids.
Sure.
And the most effective. Because if you raise your children up in the way that they should go, they will never depart from it.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee that people you share the gospel with across the world are going to actually accept it and then connect to a local church. But also, just based on the stuff you've said, the no job thing, the no dating thing, no job thing, is not, like, nowhere in the Bible does it ever say, for a time, it's okay to not have kids, unless, like, there was the thing that Paul said where it's like, if you have this gift that, like, almost nobody has, if you have the gift of celibacy, that's good for you, like, pursue ministry. But for everybody else in the whole world, which is like 99% of people, you've got to have kids because, or you've got to get married because there's sin if you don't. And it seems like Fusion, even for that year, prevents you from doing that. when you could be pursuing these relationships to become this biblical adult who has kids and gets married. And the job thing, the Bible says if you don't work, you shouldn't eat.
Yeah.
And I assume you eat good meals all year while you're in Fusion.
Well, cafeteria food is bad. As good as you can get.
That's fair. So maybe you're barely eating.
Yeah.
Another thing that that I think churches should emphasize, and my church does, is hard work.
Yeah.
And obviously Fusion challenges you and you do hard work, but
I know a lot of people who have come out of Fusion lazy.
Again, I don't think it's fair to say, because we see people who come out of Fusion as lazy, that it's Fusion's fault. I see a lot of people who come out of Fusion and work hard labor jobs. Like, I know 5 guys who came out of Fusion this last year and are working 40 hours of roofing every week because they want to do something with their hands and be able to provide. And so it's like, maybe Fusion is training people to get good jobs instead of bad jobs. Like,
well, are they though?
Maybe.
I mean, I'm saying, like, I don't think it's fair to justify saying, oh, people who come out of Fusion are lazy when it's not across the board. Like,
yeah, that's
is
true.
there people who come out of Fusion that are lazy? Sure.
Yeah.
Is that on Fusion? No. Like, is there people who come out of Fusion that are well skilled and work hard?
Let me
Yes.
rephrase and say I know people who come out of Fusion lazy and continue doing Fusion.
Sure.
And continue the process and don't
And-
get a job and don't get a job and don't get a job.
Yeah,
And then finally, after 5 years, they're working.
Yeah.
And in this so-called discipleship that Fusion is supposed to be walking them through to become biblical adults, they're not kicking their butts and making them get a job.
Yeah, I don't think.
And so, to me, I mean, you're right. You're totally right that if, just because like a bad egg pops out every now and then, it doesn't make Fusion unilaterally bad. Absolutely, for sure. If Fusion sees this stuff happen, or if a church, let's say, if a church consistently has people with a certain kind of problem come out of it, and I've heard the same thing, that like Cody's seen this himself. He's been removed from Fusion for years and years. He knows a lot of Fusion students. I know people who know a lot of Fusion students, and and we could just be wrong, but this is stuff that we've observed, and this is maybe something that Fusion needs to consider, that it seems like something that is a common problem. And it could just be people this could not be Fusion's fault, it could be Midwestern's fault, I don't know. But if Fusion were trying to disciple people in Midwestern, they would be trying to fix this. So regardless of whose fault it is,
Sure.
there is a problem that a lot of people leave Fusion or Midwestern or wherever, and they think missions or the church is more important than hard work or getting a job, and missions and ministry is more important than finding a wife.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, therefore, it doesn't mean it's necessarily Fusion's fault, but it is their fault if they don't recognize this and then say, okay, a lot of these people are coming out of here, let's fix it.
Sure. Yeah, I think I can agree with that.
Okay. So something else that I think would be really interesting to get more of your opinion on is the ground school thing with Fusion, and they focus a lot on like suffering and doing hard things. One of the connections that I made when I was having my conversation with Cody was that if this is a thing that Fusion emphasizes, and again, this could just be one of those things that's like Fusion is not Midwestern. Fusion is this salt and light city on a hill in the middle of this wasteland that is Midwestern. But if Fusion so emphasizes suffering for Christ and doing ministry when it's hard, why would the seminary and Fusion shut down for COVID?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I lived in Kansas City during that time. I knew people in Fusion, but I wasn't super connected to it. I think the reason that it came down to they didn't send teams overseas that year is because the countries they were sending people to, you couldn't get to that country. The country literally shut down any access in or out of the country for anybody.
Sure.
And so the reason Fusion didn't send teams that year was they couldn't send them to the places they trained 9 months to go. They've learned a language for 9 months. They've learned the culture of that place. And it's they couldn't send them there then. And so it's not by any means that they were ill-equipped or that they were I think breaking under the pressure of the seminary or the government, but it's just they couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah. So aside from Fusion, what about just the seminary? The seminary shut down.
Yeah, I mean,
Were they caving to pressure?
I have no clue. I mean,
Well, they would have had to. Of
You
course
talked
they
about
did.
it, yeah.
They shut down.
There were
They had the choice and they shut down. So of course they gave
Sure.
church.
There were professors writing like
Letters to church.
letters, well, and even out to the general public in school,
Yeah.
about why you should get vaccinated and why you need to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
I mean, there were.
Is this bad?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, again, like 4 years ago, I was 15, and like I didn't keep up a ton with seminary life. And again, like I'm like saying throughout this whole conversation, like I don't agree with a lot of like what Midwestern is doing, what they're pushing.
Yeah.
And so like I would agree, like I don't think it's good that professors are publicly saying to like people like, hey, you need to get vaccinated, or you need to do X, Y, and Z.
And
when it comes to the COVID thing,
those professors, they still work at Midwestern.
I believe it.
Scary. And so, on a side point, you know when people attend Fusion, they're paying their salaries.
Yeah.
Is that
I think
okay?
They're also being
majority.
taught by them.
And you're being taught by these. A lot of them are awful people, and you're paying their salaries.
Yeah, I think majority of money that goes towards Fusion, while I would say, yeah, a good amount of it does go towards, maybe not even a good amount, but maybe like some amount goes towards paying the salaries of people. Like majority of it goes towards trainings and overseas costs.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I would agree that you're probably giving money to some professor who you don't agree with, or who you could even say is like doing like evil things or wicked things.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I can't deny it because I don't know like the exact numbers of like where all the money in Fusion is going.
Sure. And I don't either, so that's
Yeah.
fair. Yeah.
I wanted to bring up. Do you think? So you say most people should do Fusion. I'm sure you're going to say everyone should do Fusion. Do you think that people should go into debt to do Fusion?
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
I would say no, and I think there's good ways to not go into debt.
So I went into debt. Do you think Fusion should have done something to stop me from going into debt? Because why? Because I almost never hear anything from Fusion saying maybe this isn't for you.
Yeah, I think-
they like money. Seems to me. So
I mean,
of
and
course
maybe
they would-
that's driven from
they want you to
Midwestern
get it.
itself. My speculation is that Fusion wouldn't exist at Midwestern if it was. Fusion brings in the vast majority of the undergraduates at Midwestern. I mean, it brings in at least the Spurgeon College has grown in the past few years.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe at least a few years ago, I mean, you're bringing in at least like 50 people a year
Sure.
to the undergraduate college, and so the whole system is. This is how I perceive things. So you go in under the guise of intercultural studies degrees, which is worth absolutely nothing in the real world. You take all these classes that will not transfer to anywhere else, except for maybe another Bible college. So you get sucked into a degree that's not useful for the rest of your life. And sometimes people like you just don't go back to school. And I would say good for you.
Good for you.
Good
Yeah,
for you.
I agree.
So many
Seriously.
people don't feel like they have that option because they're being pushed from their parents. Hey, you have to finish your degree. You have to finish college.
And like you can't truly become a better Christian as efficiently unless you do our special program, which we're glad you got out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. To answer your question, like, should people go into debt for Fusion? Like, depends on where you stand on that, but I don't think people should go into debt. Period.
Man, wow, I like this guy.
Like,
Hot take.
Yeah.
Me too.
Go into debt. But yeah, I mean, I
I
think
don't know, maybe except for more.
Home. Yeah.
there you
Okay,
go.
okay.
Maybe an exception.
Sure.
But yeah, I think Fusion gives a lot of tools of how not to go into debt. Whether that's support raising.
Except for the okay, I see what you're
Yeah,
saying. Got it.
support raising specifically is a big one. Like one of the first things like Fusion students get told like before they enter the program, but then like even like week 2 of the semester, they're like told like these are ways that like you can support raise, and this is like how you can do it well. I came out of Fusion with $0 in debt. Obviously,
Good for
a little
you.
bit different than you. And so
Most people don't do that though.
yeah, I mean I don't know. Again, I don't know the numbers.
averages. I'm sure there's a fair amount of people who do go into
Sure,
I
there's probably-
almost guarantee most people.
I would say there's probably also a fair amount of people who like ignore sound wisdom and don't run with it when they've been given it.
Sure. Fair.
But that's not just a seminary thing. It's like a thing all around life. And so,
I'll go ahead.
you.
So that made me think of another point. So if Fusion really is that much better than the rest of Midwestern, Why doesn't Fusion just split off and become its own independent organization?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for it is like Fusion does get a lot of support from Midwestern financially.
This corrupt seminary.
Yeah, I mean,
should we be getting our money, should we be basically bribed to stay somewhere by corrupt people?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make the argument a lot bigger if you want to. Like, where do you get your money from? Like, for like your job, it's like, is it from a corrupt workplace?
I'm self-employed.
There you go. What are the people? Who are the kind of people that are paying you though? Like, are they like wicked people who are pagans who are supporting abortion? Like, maybe. And so it's like,
money at some point comes from somewhere. Yeah,
I think there's a difference though whenever it's church. There's a difference in me shopping at Walmart than me shopping at a liberal church bookstore. Like whenever Christians are doing these things, I would say it's an even more serious issue of like, we're supporting the people who are supposed to be doing what is right and good and upholding justice versus the pagan.
And even more.
Versus
but the other thing is, you said most of the money from students goes towards just within Fusion itself.
Yeah.
And so like Fusion is this hugely popular organization. They could easily run on their own. They don't have money pouring into it from external sources.
Yeah, I mean,
and so it seems like they could be better off disconnected, unless, of course, Fusion actually officially wants to partner with Midwestern, which of course they do.
I think there's a lot of benefits for Fusion partnering with Midwestern.
Maybe socially.
One of like the big ones is like, as a SBC institution connected with the IMB gives scholarships to Fusion students to go overseas. And that pays for a good amount of their trip, which is like, again, we could get into the corruptness of the SBC and the IMB as a whole, which I know you guys would love.
We've done that before. We can avoid that, but you agree with us that it is corrupt.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think
interesting.
Bad direction.
I don't know that we should be cool with mission organizations. So the IMB actually plants churches with female pastors all the time, and like, do we want to partner with organizations like that? And be like, I don't know. It seems to me that Fusion could do a lot more to resist the bad stuff, but because they don't, what that tells me is some part of them, even if on the outside they want to be big and tough and cool and biblical Christians, they actually are capitulating behind the scenes in a lot of these areas.
It also seems like a lot of your money is actually going to pay for classes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the majority of the funds that you spend for Fusion are not actually for Fusion itself, because the Fusion program itself is actually relatively cheap, a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
But you also had to pay for your entire class schedule. Whenever I went to Midwestern, it was like $300 something a credit hour, so about $1,000 a class. So let's say you're taking 8 classes a year, $8,000. So that money's going to Midwestern itself. Sure. So I would say actually the majority is probably not even going to Fusion. It's going to Midwestern.
Yeah, I think it's about split between classes and Fusion costs itself. From like remembering the numbers back to last year, it's like, I don't even know, as a whole, like maybe $17,000. And yeah, like if you're saying like 8 classes a year, $8,000. So I think it is like maybe like half and half, but yeah, still.
So how much? So Fusion really obviously cares about missions and making disciples. How much of that is locally focused, or is it all overseas?
No, Fusion pushes for the whole program, for the whole 9 months in the U.S. and the States. They're pushing people to get discipleship from the local church they're going to find people to invest in, and then also like evangelism, like
locally.
Yeah, yep, that all happens locally.
Actually, yeah.
So I'm curious. So the what do you think about Jason K. Allen's super mansion that just appeared to double in size a couple of years ago? What do you think about
that? I didn't know it doubled in size.
It like he got like a new. I don't know the exact dimension. Somebody's probably going to call me a liar on YouTube, but like it appeared, it's huge. It's like it was a thing, and now it's 2 things.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean,
you should go drive by and look at it.
I drive by it often, actually.
Okay.
But
it's outrageously big.
Yeah.
It pretty much doubled in size.
Sure. I'm not sure I have too many thoughts on it.
Okay. What's the perception of like why did his house double in size? I've heard a lot of different reasons, and people always say that like, well, he obviously did it because of this. It's like, well, they keep telling me different reasons, so I don't think they know.
Yeah.
So what's the perception why his why he spent all that money to increase the size of his house.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you honestly.
Okay.
Like, I've never even. You're probably the first person that's brought it up to me.
Okay. So I've heard that his family outgrew it, and I think he has 4 kids. So obviously he didn't outgrow it. I've heard because the seminary wanted to honor his leadership, which is probably the likely reason. But there's no need to honor him by doubling the size. Anyway, but the point is, so right next door to his mansion is the seminary president's mansion, is a church.
Yeah.
And right next door to that church is another church, directly next door. And then directly next door to that church is a third church. And do you know what's in that church's lawn? A pride flag.
Yeah.
There is a pride flag almost touching the property of the seminary president, Jason K. Allen's super mansion. Are those people being evangelized? Should they be evangelized?
Yeah.
Should Midwestern Fusion be putting forth resources to evangelize the local community and not just what's convenient in the church that they decide to pair them with, but actually help Kansas City become more Christian? Because Kansas City, because of Kansas City, St. Joseph, and St. Louis, St. Joseph, abortion in Missouri was enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah. And
if I would expect one of the most, you said Midwestern's pretty liberal, which is funny because I've heard a lot of people say Midwestern is one of the most conservative SBC seminaries. I think they're all liberal. I think all of it's a lie. So I think you're right. It's a very liberal-leaning seminary. They call themselves conservative, of course. But it seems to me that if they were doing their job at being for the church, Kansas City would not be a spiritual wasteland.
Sure. I think as much as you want, you could put like pressure on like a seminary to like do outreach and to be reaching churches. It's like ultimately it comes down to like a work of God, right?
Of course, yeah, for sure.
Like, a seminary can only do so much to tell churches like it is wrong to like kill babies.
Yeah. But are they? Because we know you just said the seminary, the official position of the seminary is not that.
Yeah, I don't know that personally. Like, I've never heard a stance from the seminary. I know that was Cody's opinion or like what he's heard in the last podcast, but personally, like I don't know the stance of the seminary on abortion, and so I don't know what they are telling people.
They would say that they're anti-abortion, but the official stance is that the professor said, what was it, Branch?
Yeah.
Who's a tenured ethics professor, not very ethical. Branch said that it is misogynistic to believe that women are not victims of abortion. And these things are verifiable. They're true. Sure. I mean, we could be lying, but you could trust us.
Yeah.
So, like, these are, like, the seminary, the official seminary stance is anti-abortion, obviously. But are they anti-abortion? Because they, like, there's nuance, and they would say, like, well, but women aren't victims. And so, really, they're not anti-abortion. The official seminary stance that, and of course there are professors that disagree with this, but the official stance of the president, a lot of tenured professors, a lot of other professors, is that is this weak stance on abortion. And yeah, I don't know. I would like to see if they were actually for the church, the seminary, not just putting pressure on, there's only so much they can do, you're right, but they're doing nothing for that church that's gay, almost right next door to the seminary president's house.
Yeah.
And instead, they're sending people to Turkey.
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, like, I'm not saying I'm 100% supporting everything Midwestern does.
Yeah.
So.
One of the last things I wanted to talk about, one thing, I think I coined the phrase, fusion rips people out of local churches.
Yeah.
But, and you said that's just false.
Yeah.
Okay, so explain to me why that's false.
Yeah, so when Cody and me talked about this earlier on when we sat down, he said what was coming to his mind is like a very few examples of people who come into Fusion who already live in Kansas City and are like a member of a local church. That's like one of the
a lot of people who go to Midwestern are in Kansas City. It's not very few. It's like Midwestern,
but like Fusion
Kansas
itself.
Seminary.
There's at least a couple people every year who are in Fusion who are from Kansas City.
Sure. Whether they're plugged into like a local church or not. And so
why would they let anyone in who's not plugged into a local church?
I mean, there's
Oh,
a
that's
lot of Christians who aren't plugged into a local church for a lot of their life. Like, why would you, like, you can't, would you reject somebody from coming to your local church because they haven't
But
plugged into
Midwestern's
another
not
local
the
church?
church.
I'm not saying
So-
they are. The question was, does Fusion rip people out of a local church? The answer is no. And the reason is because often Fusion gives people the opportunity to be rooted in a local church. I think the example I gave in the comments was the difference between an undergrad Fusion student and an undergrad student is like what night and day. Like a Fusion student goes to one church for a whole year and they're told like this is the church you're going to because this is where your team goes. And they get people who pour into them, they get people who disciple them, who like care about them. Whereas an undergrad goes to one church for 1 week and then they go to another church another week and then maybe they'll go back to another church. They're just like bouncing around. And like that's my own experience from last year of like my team and other Fusion teams are like all plugged into a local church, and like you see like them growing in a love for that church and a desire to like walk alongside that church. They're participating in events that church is doing, and you have other undergrad students who first year in college or whatever, like they don't know what to do with themselves. Like they're like, well, I went to this church last week, but I didn't really like find a home there, and so I'm gonna go to this one, and like they don't have any way to, like push themselves into the local church. And what Fusion is doing is like they're plugging people into the local church, and even the outpouring of that is like people who are faithful members of a local church for years to come, rather than somebody who's just like ping-ponging around to a different church.
I would wonder why those people are allowed to go to Bible college anyway.
I think so. I have two comments. Hang on. One thing that maybe would clarify this here is, for those 2 people a year that are in Kansas City that are already connected to a local church, does Fusion require them to go to the church instead that their team goes to?
Yeah.
Yes.
They
Okay.
do. And
So you said yes.
Yeah.
Now that's what we're talking about.
So I
think-
in that I would think I would go back to why can't Fusion just say this program is not for you, stay in your church?
I think they can. I think
Why
it's
don't
a
they?
personal decision. Like my brother, for example, he's like one
But
of the.
you just said that they're young and mature college people. They don't maybe make the best decisions.
And the other
If
thing,
Fusion wants to help them, tell them to stay in your church.
and another
Maybe-
comment. Now, hang on. Another thing
Hey.
is one of the requirements to be a student at Midwestern, I know, is to be a member of some church.
Yeah.
And so actually,
But
It's
it's like
impossible.
whether or not it's a local church or not. It's like
if there is somebody in a local church though,
sure.
who just said that Fusion will, if they want to be in the Fusion program, Fusion will require them to leave their church. Now it might be a low percentage of cases, sure.
Sure.
And I don't doubt you that there are plenty of those students who church hop. Like that's bad. We totally agree on that. But when we were saying that the Fusion program rips people out of their local churches, it's not false because you just admitted that they do. Now it's some. It's not. It's
So
not
maybe
most.
it's not false, but it's not fully true because like what you didn't run with is like Fusion rips people out of their local church, like 2 people every year.
We
Like
did
that's not what
say-
you said. It was across the board. Fusion rips people out of their local church, and that's why Fusion's bad.
Yeah,
But it's like,
we
it's
weren't
not
trying
true.
to communicate that Fusion rips everybody out of their local church. Of course not.
But the goal wasn't to present the true side of Fusion that they don't rip everybody. That it's like a very small number. There wasn't any push to like show like I would say like a right response to that would be like there is people who have had to leave their churches because they've joined Fusion. But Fusion as a whole doesn't seek to pull people out of their local church. That would have been like
But they
a
do
right
seek, in a small number of situations,
I know, but
absolutely to pull
that's not
people
what was
out.
said in the podcast, right?
So let's amend that. My computer messed up again.
Sure.
Let's amend that. Fusion rips people out of their local churches, and Fusion helps other people find a local church when they don't have one. Both of those statements are true at the same time. So it is in the cases, I think, where somebody, and hopefully you at least could agree with this, that in the cases where somebody is committed to their local church and they don't want to leave, those people, it is one, either wrong for Fusion to rip them out of their church and force them to go to a church with their team, or they just shouldn't be a part of Fusion. Do we agree on that?
Sure.
Okay.
And I would.
Cool. I'm happy.
It's a personal decision, I would say, for everybody to choose to do Fusion
Sure.
and leave their local church for a year.
Well-
And even like
Of course, it's a personal decision,
sure.
but that should Fusion support it?
If Fusion's
Should
trying to
Fusion
make
allow
good
it?
Christians, then that doesn't seem like a wise thing that Fusion should
Because I-
ever do to
I'm not going to use the person's name because they're not here, but I'm someone that we both know. Didn't even enjoy, like they're like,
Yeah.
I wish I were back at my church
Sure.
because I love my church.
Sure.
So they absolutely rip some people out of it.
Again, it was a personal decision. by that person to leave that church.
But Fusion is the one making him a biblical adult.
Or
Sure.
they're not, because they're actively doing
But
something.
are they?
that's
Is it that
against
they're not
it.
participating in local church body like discipleship at all? No, it's like they are part of the local church. Like that he's still. It's not like that person like stopped going to church for a year. Like they were
Sure,
still part of the
sure.
local church, whether it was like the church they wanted to be a part of or not. Again, it was a personal decision for him to choose to go to that church. He
Maybe
could have
this
chose
is-
not to do it at any point.
Maybe this is just
Yeah.
another problem with Midwestern, because it seems that maybe Midwestern treats churches as like shops. Because a church ought to be your family, and it ought to be something that we are taught to have a serious commitment to. Even the church that I used to go to, Emmaus, prided themselves as being, what do they call it, a transient church. They were like, we have so many people that come through our church and come here and leave every couple of years. It's great. We get to disciple so many people. And then I was looking around and I was like, this is gross. This is really bad. Like, a church should not be this way. We did not have the time to develop any kind of significant culture or family feeling. That is not the way a church ought to be. And maybe it's not Fusion's fault. Maybe it's Midwestern's fault. But it seems like, and Midwestern was and still is, even though Emmaus is crumbling, very closely tied with churches like Emmaus and other churches. And they are happy because they have so many seminary students coming in and leaving to just say like, oh, we're a transient church. We don't, like, people can just come and leave, and church isn't something where we need to be committed to for too long. And so maybe that's another thing that's not necessarily Fusion's fault, but it's just Midwestern's fault. But do you agree with that assessment of what a church ought to be?
100%.
Okay. And would you also agree, not necessarily that Fusion is doing this, but if they were to discourage people from having that kind of commitment at a church, would that be a bad thing?
If they were to discourage, like,
People from having this kind of long-term commitment at churches?
yeah, I wouldn't say that's a good thing for them.
Okay, cool. Now, we don't know if they do that. I mean, they might not. It seems to me like they discourage that, but we could agree to disagree.
I mean, I would say they aren't doing that, but yeah.
Now, Midwestern does it, and again, this is another situation of Fusion being closely connected with Midwestern,
Sure.
who actively discourages people from having commitment to churches long-term. But, you know, maybe...
I think for me, it just goes back to the. I think we've talked about this. The entire worldview is just off, in my opinion. Like I said, why? And if Fusion people hear this, I'll ask you this question: why would it not be better to facilitate everything through? So Midwestern has connection with, I don't know, probably 50 churches in Kansas City.
Mhm.
To set aside godly older men
Mhm.
in the church to train young men into biblical adulthood, instead of some guy who's the same age as them, sometimes younger, sometimes a little older, who is just as immature as they are. I mean,
Yeah.
and there's extremely immature people who do Fusion. So
Sure.
so sometimes the advocate is more mature.
Yeah,
But
I
like, do you agree that maybe there's a better system?
Yeah,
That could be-
maybe so. Yeah, I wouldn't say I think like you like many examples like older men, like obviously like are wiser, more mature. Like if we're talking like guys in their 40s who like have a wife, they've been married 15 years, 4 kids, whatever. Like those guys are going to be more mature, obviously, than somebody who's like junior in college. Like I'll agree on that. The question is like how much time and commitment can an older man give to discipling and walking alongside somebody?
Yeah.
And giving themselves to push this person towards holiness. And
If that's one of the
Right.
roles
Well, I
of the
don't-
church, a lot of time.
I don't think that's really preparing people for biblical manhood and womanhood, because you're not going to get that in real life.
what I guess what would
You're not
be
gonna
your,
get
what would be your
fusion in real
definition
life.
of biblical manhood or womanhood?
I mean,
Your summation.
what
answer.
is fusions? I think that would be a.
I think like if you were to answer like what is a biblical man or a biblical woman? Like what would be your answer?
I mean, I think the problem is that Fusion doesn't have a real answer for that. We want to prepare people to be biblical men and women. So does Fusion have an answer for that?
Do you have an answer for it though? Like
I think we can look at
if we're
individual.
gonna play a game back and forth, like
I think
I'll
we-
answer your question if you answer mine.
We can. I'll help. I think we can, and then we'll move on because we gotta go soon. But I think we can look at individual situations and analyze those to see if that's biblical or not, instead of probably your definition and Fusion's definition would be very similar of what a biblical man or woman looks like. Probably. Let's give them some grace. But if we look at the individual, like, for example, Midwestern would have a very, like, they would say the right things, but the question is, do they do the right things? And a lot of the stuff seems, we're kind of skeptical of that. And also, like you said in your comments, that you don't want to, like, blast Christians for disagreeing with you, even though it's ironic when people say things like that, because, like, I'm offering an opinion about a certain thing, and then you leave a comment disagreeing with me, because I'm disagreeing with somebody else, and it's like, so is it wrong that I'm, like, is it wrong to disagree, or is it wrong to have the wrong opinion? So obviously it's not wrong to disagree. For sure. Like I said, I admire you for wanting to confront us and talk to me face to face. This has never happened before, where somebody messaged me and was like, hey, I think you're wrong, let's talk about this. And so that's cool. But I think looking at the individual situations within Fusion or Midwestern or anything else is where we really find if they're being biblical or not. And we've just talked through a ton of them, the church thing, the COVID thing, tons of them. And the funny thing is we agree on Midwestern's mishandling of every single one of those things. But you also believe that Fusion did all those things correct, which is okay. And I'm actually completely happy ending this conversation and agreeing that, like, to me, Midwestern is the bigger problem. If Midwestern is fixed, then also Fusion's going to get fixed to us. But if there's nothing wrong with Fusion, then Midwestern still needs to be fixed, right?
Sure.
Like, there is still tons of corruption in Midwestern that needs to be fixed. So, like, we can agree, I think, to, like, cool, let's agree to disagree on Fusion. Let's all go at Midwestern and really, like, push them to get out their liberal professors and to come down hard against their president for his stupid opinion on abortion and idolizing him with his super mansion, and Midwestern refusing to send people to gay churches right down the street, like all that stuff, CRT in the bookstore, all this stuff. Like, that's the thing that I think we should be focusing on. And so I'm glad that we actually agree on those things, which I think are far more important than the minutia of how Fusion functions. So I'm happy that we had this conversation. I'm happy you were courageous enough, because that, like I said at the beginning, that attitude is far too uncommon at places like Midwestern, I think. So I think you, like, your demeanor fits a lot more with our side, I think, than maybe you want it to. But I'll leave you with the last word, or if either of you want to say anything, then we can hit the road.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity for you guys even willing to, like, meet face to face. Like, obviously we've done it before this.
We're not afraid of having conversations and disagreeing with people, and it's okay to disagree about
for
stuff.
sure. Yeah. I'm thankful. Yeah, even just for the opportunity to clear things up. Like, if there was things, in my opinion, that were unclear in that first podcast, like, an opportunity for people to, like, see this video and, like, say, okay, maybe, like, those things weren't true, and, like, maybe we don't have to have a bad opinion or sway people away from doing Fusion or whatever. Or maybe they're like, we're still convinced that all these things are bad, which they're entitled to their own opinion, even if that opinion's wrong. But
it's fair.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk with you guys.
Well, cool. Theo, it was good to talk to you.
Super.